Just before we carry on going through the next part of the model, we're just going to go have a look through the sculpt so far to see if we've missed anything. And we're just going to go over this foregrip, and I've noticed that in the concept I remember saying that there is some welding sections here where the pieces of brass or copper have joined together. So we're just going to do that now. Let me get my tablet back out. Okay, just going to smooth this over a little bit. And the way we're going to do this, we're just going to use the standard brush with, well, yeah, we'll just try the standard brush for now. Usually I would either use the standard or the clay with a circle alpha, and then just smooth it down. And we kind of want to be a little bit rough. Just okay, I'm just going to smooth this out here, just so we don't get those nasty sharp edges. You can see them there. Just going to increase the intensity. And we're just going to sculpt them. What we're going to do is go into modifiers and increase the smooth to 1. What this will do is smooth the brush out, so it we don't have to do as much smoothing. And it's okay if it's not perfectly straight. These things tend not to be perfectly uniform. Especially if they're old, they would be damaged and we want it to do it enough that it will pick up on the normal map nicely. And you've probably noticed that I haven't done the bevels, the Boolean operation on the other side as well, because it would typically have that thread. And that's mainly because the thread is covered with this sealant tape. And I've got a couple of ideas how we can do that, because there's quite a bulge there. So what we're going to do is probably going to use, when we simulate the tape, we would just maybe use a torus there just to create the overall shape of it, because it's quite round, and then just simulate the tape over that. Sometimes I've noticed that when I go back into Zbrush after going to a different monitor or to a different program, the strength of the brush has been increased like tenfold. And I found that the only solution to this is alt-tabbing, then alt-tabbing again. And it tends to work. So just smoothing it out again, and there we go. Okay, that's looking a lot better now. Let's see about anything else. Maybe just detailing this nut a little bit on the inside here. just a little bit similar to the other one, because there is some detail here that might actually be writing, but I'm not too sure. So I'm just going to go to the main part of this gun, the main grip. I'm just going to save this. And then another incremental save. What we'll do, in fact, is we'll start merging this over. Okay. There we go. Now I've noticed as well that I've not done that bit of detail there. So I'm just going to quickly do that. Just going to make the hole a bit deeper. Okay. I've noticed something as well that, well, this is basically a modified pistol. It's a, well, I say modified, a custom pistol, impromptu pistol, because it takes a .22 cartridge based off a news report. So one thing I noticed that not only are we missing a trigger, but is how does it fire the bullet? Because usually when you press the trigger, it activates the hammer at the back, which hits the firing pin, which hits the back of the bullet. Let me just get some reference for you to show you. So this is a good example. This is by a guy called Thomas Schwenke, and it shows the hammer, once the trigger's been pulled, the hammer is released and it hits the firing pin, which then hits the back of the bullet. So on this is actually it's sort of a mixture. It seems to be, because of what it fires, a handgun. However, it has a ball action involved, which is very strange. And I've just realised I need to bring this forward. Because it's a ball action, what we're going to have to do is to make it a firing mechanism similar to that of a ball action. And I found a good example of this. So let me just play this in. Oh. Slow motion. So when the trigger's pulled up, releases this sear, I think it's called, and hits the firing pin, which could be hidden in all of this. The trigger comes up here, releases the sear, which hits forward and hits the bullet. So we're going to do something like that, have the trigger going up there when we come to it, that is. But for now, we're going to go along with the tape, make a start on the tape. So what we want to do for this is, I'm just going to save this again just to be sure. And then make another incremental save. So now what we don't need the foregrip, and we don't really need all of that just for this tape. So we're just going to hide this and then get the stuff that we do need, which is essentially just this. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into, we're going to get the Zeb plugin for Subtool Master. And then we're going to merge only visible. So we should have this now. And then we're just going to decimate this. Alright, so it's done computing. I'm just going to decimate it to 20% of 7 million. And to be honest, 1.5 million is pretty good. What we're going to use for the simulating of the tape is Marvelous Designer. If you don't have this, I'm pretty sure you can do it in Blender, especially with the new collisions they have for the cloth. So if I get time and if I'm able to, I'll try and do an alternative version in a different video specifically for that, to see if I can do the same using the tools that Blender has. But for the moment, I'm going to just be using Marvelous Designer. for this particular task. So I use Marvelous Designer 7.5 because the new versions are very expensive. um, so this is what you'll see when you load it up. Just select all the clothing and clear it all. Just delete everything and delete all these. Apart from the zipper, just add new fabric. Just call it tape. And what I tend to do is give it a shinier look just to help me differentiate from the mesh. So I'm just going to import and add and just obj remove it up garment because you get all this funky stuff that you don't want. All these different options. I'm just going to import this now and just keep everything to standard. Okay, here we go. Actually, it's a bit sluggish, actually. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back into Zbrush and I'm just going to decrease it some more because it's only a reference mesh. And I'm probably just going to take it down even more. That should be perfect, really. I'm not going to get any issues doing any cloth emulation with that. Oh, nearly the wrong one. Much faster. There we go, that's better. So now we just need to make some tape just like this. So at the moment I'm just going to focus on this piece here. And the way I'm going to do this actually is I'm just going to select it in the middle here. And I'm going to tilt it, holding shift to snap on the axis. And then I'm just going to bring it above the center, because when you do the simulations it won't go past it. In my experience it doesn't go past the grid. So if you raise it up higher, the reason why I'm doing this is because if you notice on the reference how it's obviously wrapped around and then it sticks at the bottom here. So when we simulate it going across, it'll um, it'll wrap around much easier than having it going any other way. So let's just rectangle tool. I'm just going to draw approximation of how thick this would be. Let's do this thing. It's too thick. So I'm just going to use the edit tool and make it a little bit thinner. I need to make it a little bit longer. So this goes at an angle. It's still too thick. So this seems pretty good. Particle distance at the moment, so we're not going to mess with too many settings. The only settings we're going to mess with is the particle distance, shrinkage weft, and the shrinkage warp, and the pressure as well. Maybe the collision. Actually, we're going to set that to 1 for now. Let's see how it plays out. So, just to begin, before we mess with any of those settings, we're just going to do the initial simulation. Going to hit spacebar. Now, see how it collides with the floor there. So that's okay for now, but we can do better than this. So we're just going to Control Z. Just going to bring this up a bit. And we're going to bring this up as well. This does mean when we import it back into Blender, for example, because what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to bring this back into Zbrush to do some cleanup, because the mesh isn't always that tidy. So when we bring it into Blender, we're going to have to rotate it and place it in its proper position with the right orientation, and then export it out to Zbrush. Because if we add some thickness in Marvelous Designer, we will weld all the verts that aren't connected, any edges that aren't connected together. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I'm just going to pause it by hitting spacebar, and then all I'm going to do is set this to 10, which what this does is it increases the poly count of the mesh, creating a more accurate result. So if we hit spacebar again, you see it becomes a little bit more accurate with the creases. And we select it again. Now what we're going to do is we're going to decrease the shrink to weft to 95% and the shrinkage warp to 92.5%. And then you'll see how it shrinks upwards, which is what we want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a negative value for the pressure, and that should wrap things around. And this is what I feared would happen. Okay, so we're going to shift control or shift F to reset the orientation. And then what we're going to do is bring it down further so it doesn't collide with the other side. Scrapes along the floor, then licks over. Just going to pause it for now. Just see what's going on here. Let's see what happens. And now you can just start pulling it out. Let it do some simulation whilst holding onto it, and then letting go. See, we don't really want it to curl over like this. I mean, you might want to, but I just don't want to right now. Or do I? That could look good. But you'll notice as well that there's no wrinkles in it like there is here. So what we're going to do is we're essentially going to just pinch up a part of it and then just allow it to come in a little bit and then let go. And then we have our fold here. Just going to do the same again. Allow it to come in a little bit and then let go. And the same is we're going to do again on the top. Just pinch it, allow it to come in a little bit, then let go. This is where the shrinkage weft and warp comes into play, because it will just suck the fabric in. It will shrink it as you pull it up, which is really nice and ideal. So we're just going to pause it and have a look. Hit simulate again and then just do the same again over here. Don't really like how uniform it is there. So before it collapses entirely, I'm just going to pause it just to capture those details there. Whoa, that's made me feel a bit sick. There we go, I think that's pretty good for now. So what we're going to do is add a little bit of thickness. Just a little bit. And you can see how faceted it is here. There's not a lot of geo to support the edges. So to solve this again would be to decrease the particle distance to 5. I think anything below 5 you do get a warning. Because it becomes quite intensive to simulations. If you hit the simulation again, it just smooths all of that out. Then hit pause again before it stops. So I kind of like how this is coming like this, but I don't. So I'm just going to hit simulation again. I'm just going to grab this piece up. You can tell there's a lot more polygons because it's a lot slower in doing the simulations. It's starting to have a bit of a hissy fit here. Just going to calm it down. Just going to hit pause on that. Just trying to strike a good balance because I'm also thinking about the retopology stage. How will this look? Because you'll see the underside here. And I mean, you could model that part, but that's a lot of geo, really. So typically with something like this, it would have to be a mesh on its own, which could solve the issue because you could have that section as rendering back faces, but again, it's not really ideal. I guess you could just put a little solidify modifier in and then just not delete all the parts that you're not going to see. Again, just trying to bunch it together to get those wrinkles on the top of the barrel. What have I done that for? Okay, well, that'll do for now, I guess. Actually, no, it won't. Whoops. Yeah, that will do. I don't want to mess with it anymore. So, I'm just going to export this. Set it as thick. And just leave it as is. So now we're going to go into Blender. And we're going to import it. So we're just going to set the origin to the geometry. Rotate it 90 degrees. And then just place it where it needs to be. So what we need to do now is select all the verts. We want to merge by distance. And now the verts that were along this blue line are all merged together. So it's now one object. And now what we can do with this is that we can take it into Zbrush. And we can just smooth it out a bit, get a better topology for it. Because if we were to bake this out, all this faceted edges would come out with it too. We don't really want that. Just going to save. And then we're just going to do the other part of the tape now. So what we're going to do, we're going to, what we can do is we can Control D and put this to the side, which copies the shape. When we do that, it becomes linked. So we are going to remove linked editing. And then we're going to Control F to reset the shape. And we definitely don't need it to be as big. But before we do that, we don't want that to move and to be simulated. So we're just going to Control K to freeze that selection so that isn't affected by the simulation. And this is really helpful actually if you're like doubling up pieces of cloth, which is what I do regularly around like hand wraps. I mean, grips or foregrips where there's multiple pieces of tape going in different directions. If you were to freeze the first layer, the bottom layer of the tape, and then build upon it, then freeze that, and then carry on going. Oh, looks like I have accidentally duplicated there. So we're just going to make this a little bit smaller because we don't need as much. It's always good to go at a little bit of an angle just to get some interesting folds. And we're going to let that sim. Again, we're getting that issue where it folds as it meets, so it's not actually folding. So we're just going to go back and then bring it down a little bit, just so that side can wrap around first. Again, using the same technique of just pinching it up and letting it come towards it, and then letting go. It comes out a little bit, but it does create a fold here. What I might do for this piece is just leave it at 95% and it seems to bounce back too quickly and too much. Most of this is going to be covered up by the Jubilee clip anyway, so don't have to worry about this getting too detailed. But I really, I really like that detail here. Shame it's probably going to be covered up, but nevertheless, there we go. It's something. So we're just going to select that, then export it again. I mean, what we could do to create quads is we could go to Edit, Context menu, 3D Garment, and then we could go to Quadrangulate, which would convert all the triangles to quads, which is really good for sculpting shape. But considering we're going to Z remesh anyway, it's going to do that process for us. So there's not much point. Whoops. Have we gone over? We have. Okay. So let's move this if we can. Got those. I'm just going to pause it actually and then move it over. This might go a little bit crazy. There we go. Sometimes this happens, whereby when the mesh intersects the reference mesh, it really struggles to fix itself. So there's some bit of tug of war that needs to happen. I actually think it might be too long there. It's kind of nice to have those interesting shapes on the end actually. It's quite rough. We could sell it actually a little bit more. So let's keep that. I'm just going to freeze that by pressing Ctrl K. I'm just going to go over to this one and press Ctrl K again to unfreeze it. Now, I'm just going to work on this one a little bit more because I'm not entirely happy with it. The idea is with these forms that we're making, is that we want to preserve these forms in the low poly. So when we create the low poly for these, we're going to simplify the shape as much as possible where it's flat, and then have the detail in the the folds themselves. That way you can get a real nice silhouette with the low poly. Okay, so I'm going to re-export this out. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put one at a time. There we go, that's much better. And delete that. Then import. Oh, there we go. So just like before, I'm just going to select them both this time to do it all in one. I'm going to select all the verts and then just merge by distance. Now it's one mesh. Oh, that's looking really good. So this ends this part, and the next part will be on the Zbrush section of the duct tape. So now we've got our tape simulated and we have it back in Blender. What we're going to do now is we're going to prepare it for Zbrush. We've already merged vertices by distance, which means that all the vertices along this blue edge here that you can see that's marked along the border of the geometry have all been welded. So this mesh is all one now, and so is this. Just going to check that the faces are the right way around, and that just reminds me I need to, I'll do that once that's an actual mesh, so ignore that for now. Yeah, I think that's looking okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to export both of these at the same time. But first, before we do that, we want to all transforms to center, just to reset everything, all the scaling and positional information, it's all back to 0. And then we're just going to origin back to geometry. Back to geometry. So now the pivots are centered there on each one. So we're just going to export as OBJ, making sure they're triangulated. Well, it's already going to be triangulated anyway. But I'm just going to call it gutter gun tape. So now I'm just going to load up the Zbrush. And I'm going to open up that scene. There we go. And now we're just going to import these. As you can tell, really bad topology at the moment. So whilst we're in this tool, we're just going to work with it as is. So my UI is gone again, so I'm just going to refresh it. I'm just going to auto group. Just create those two groups. Now, if we didn't weld those vertices beforehand in Blender, we would have had groups along this whole edge, the strip that goes along the edge that combines them both. And the inner faces and the outer faces, they would have been separate. So now it's all one whole mesh. We can get busy remeshing. There is one thing we might want to do before doing this, so we just see how this looks. Okay, not so bad actually. The other thing that I was going to do beforehand, because it is very thin, and I know tape is thin, but because we lose detail from far away, we want people to be able to recognize that this is tape on there and it has some level of thickness. So we could, now that we've got better geometry for this, a more even topology, what we could do is go into deformation and use the inflate tool. And just sometimes it's quite difficult to get the accuracy right. So if you hold shift, no, ignore that. So I'm just going to do it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remesh again. The only issue is that it is losing some of its form. So I'm just going to go back to before even remeshing it, Z-remeshing it. I'm just going to do the inflation here again. Just like that. And then I'm going to remesh. We just want that edge just to be visible when we create the normal map for it. So that's looking a lot better. We haven't lost the form as much. So we've got some intersections we need to fix in here. So I'm just going to subdivide a couple of times. And just going to smooth out. When you're smoothing whilst holding shift, I don't know why there is a difference, but there is a difference when you hold shift and smooth versus when you start smoothing, you let go as you're smoothing. There seems to be a bit of a difference. I find that when you let go of shift while smoothing, it holds the form a lot better, whereas smoothing really sort of destroys the form. So what I'm going to do with this part now is I'm just going to pick up my brush panel and I'm going to look for the move to topological. I'm just going to bring this a little bit higher. Just go down to a subdivision level so it's just a bit more responsive. And the reason why I'm doing this is just so that the edges of this don't become lost with the flat surface here. And you can clearly see where the tape starts and ends. Same again here, just gonna okay. Same process, just smoothing this out. What helps with the smoothing process, because well, this tape it's almost like a rubbery sort of texture. What helps with this, if you go to a lower subdivision level and then smooth out, because there's less polygons, so the polygons are trying to average out a lot more. And then you go to a higher subdivision level and just sort of refine that those faces. You just have to be careful because if there's detail like this where the tape goes underneath and we see that there's tape over it, like this part here, it's creating a bit of an edge, a lip to it. And we want to keep that to give the illusion that there's tape underneath, it's doubled up. So just make sure you don't lose that detail when you're smoothing out. It's those sort of details that I really appreciate. I'm just checking if there's any parts of the mesh that needs pulling out. Don't think there is. It's looking all right. So I'm just going to delete subdivision levels because we can always rebuild them if necessary. And let's go to the main file. I'm just going to append them in. It's looking sweet. Really nice. And I'm just going to save this now. I'm just going to create a new one. I'm going to do the same where you refresh it all or restore. So there's just not a ton of tools. So this is our main working file now. I'm just going to save that as 2. So I've noticed that we've lost that detail that was there. And really, I would like that to be seen, so I'm going to bring it over here. So I'm just going to, oops, what's going on there? Ah, that's why, because this is merged. Going to delete that. I'm just going to sculpt that detail back in. Just going to find the pinch brush. Oh, that's definitely not it. There we go. Just bring that to a point more. There we go. It's a bit better. And there we go. That's how I typically do tape. It might not be the best workflow for everyone because not everyone uses Marvelous Designer like I do, but I find it's one of the most effective and quickest ways to create good looking tape, realistic looking tape. But yeah, so now we are going to go into the next section, which will be let me see, we do have some more tape to do. We've got the tape around here and we've got the tape around there, but it's the same principle, so I don't think I'd need to record it or explain much, so it'll probably be sped up